This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam peoples.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is April 9th, 2026.
I'm Scott Delennebaum.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. On today's show, where the BC Legislature and House of Commons are on break, we still have some spicy political drama with fines to BC United, who still apparently exist, and one of the BC Conservative leadership candidates. David Eby and the BC government tinker around with housing orders. We have always my favorite fun segments, diving into party finances and spreadsheets on a podcast, and some federal political drama with unexpected floor crossers. Lots to get into, but I feel like making it quick so I can go back to playing Switch 2 and Pokemon Pokopia, because it is a very good game. Highly recommend it if you want to stop living. It's frickin' Animal Crossing Minecraft, but Pokemon. It's adorable. It's so cozy.
I'll take your word for it. Usually when I get lost in video games, it's going to be either Civ 5 or City Skylines.
I'll get back to those soon enough. Support our gaming addictions at patreon.com/politicoast. Let's start with the drama we didn't expect from Elections BC. Last 2 years ago now, almost, we reported, and many others reported, on this website that had popped up in August 2024 in advance of the election, firejohnrustad.ca. And it was weird because it was unclear who launched this, who was behind it. It claimed to be former members or current members of the BC Conservatives who didn't have faith in how he was doing.
Or names associated with them.
Yeah.
All anonymous.
Yeah. So there was some skepticism around it, but no one was like, hey, this is straight up disinformation. Turns out it was. It's just straight up lies. So what I didn't see reported at the time is there were also physical mailouts that went to some houses alleging Teresa Watt, a Conservative candidate who was formerly with BC United, was a criminal under for violating the foreign interference laws of the federal government. And those were tied to the same Fire John Rustad campaign. Elections BC dug into all of this based on a few complaints they received. And what they found out is the money behind this was actually BC United.
Yeah, and I'd gotten paid to a Calgary company that is run by a person who is now leader or party president of was it Alberta Republican Party?
Yeah, one of the separatist.
Yeah, which
groups.
is also just a little wild. If I was going to guess which party was paying that particular political consultancy communications company that in the last election, Conservatives would have been my guess, not BC United.
So Elections BC says these ads were decided by campaign staff within BC United. They were not, like, the whole party wasn't involved in it, but the party didn't take enough steps to make sure things were verified and that this didn't happen. Specifically, it was the deputy campaign manager and campaign manager with BC United who, met with Sovereign North, this strategist group, to commission these. They provided the copy, like the actual text as well, of these ads and this website. And so Elections BC says this violates Section 234.1A of the Election Act by transmitting a false statement that a candidate had committed an offense about the Teresa Watt bit. And it kind of just is unimpressed by the broader campaign.
think everyone was, considering they folded not long after this occurred. There's also some allegations in here that ultimately didn't result in a fine, but sure sounds like there were some pretty sketchy loose controls when it came to some of the money stuff going on, and that the party in their response to the Elections BC investigation told that Elections BC that the financial agent who has to authorize any election advertising didn't in this case, too, which is also a problem.
Yeah, I did see. I went back and looked, and reporting on this Fire John Rustad website was all about mid-August. I think it was August 19th, which is after August 9th decision that BC United made. The party executive passed a resolution on August 9th saying the treasurer needs to directly authorize further expenses, and that authorization was not given for this advertising, which went out a week later. And then, just to keep the timeline in mind, it was August 28th, so 10 days after the ads were talked about, that Falcon suspended BC United's campaigns. It was a very busy month for that party. But Scott, what do you get for violating the Elections Act?
Well, in this case, the Act authorizes up to $20,000 in fines. The actual fine in this case is significantly less than that at $4,500.
Such a joke.
I'm not sure I don't know if I've ever seen Elections BC give out a fine that is even in the upper half of the range they can fine.
Yeah. And I don't know what the right fine for this is.
I kind of get the sense that the more chaotic it is, the less clear who did what, the more leeway they give on fining compared to a case where it's very clear one person really deliberately went around it. But it's hard to say on this. This reads oh wow, this thing was such a mess. We can't really hit them with the full amount. Maybe, I don't know. It's weird trying to read between the lines on this one, or why they made that particular determination.
Yeah, the deputy chief electoral officer just says, based on this, I give you this fine. I think they do note that the party was cooperative and had not previously been fined for this specific contravention.
Yeah, which I think would limit it to the lower end on it. I imagine being uncooperative with the investigation and having racked up a bunch of fines in the past would have probably resulted in a higher fine.
It does say something, though, that lying about your political opponents in a dark money campaign to sink their chances can only net you $20,000 in a fine. And 18 months later. That's not inspiring, as we've talked about in the past with some of Elections BC's investigations, is, I think the agency does pretty well overall, but things like this aren't inspiring. Shake my faith a bit. John Rustad now is saying this dirty trick cost them the election. Maybe.
I mean, I'm not sure if that's true. It didn't help. Well, it's also one of those things where the election was close enough that you could probably point to any one of a dozen things and be yes, this was the thing that caused it, and maybe somewhat overdetermined in that sense, but I have trouble believing this was the thing that definitively caused them to lose.
Also, Teresa Watt won 58% to 34% in 2024 in Richmond Bridgeport.
Yeah, I mean, she's consistently done well locally on those.
And increased her vote over what she got as a Liberal. So,
but also, I admittedly kind of had forgotten about this until the story came back around.
Right.
When I think about that election, this was not the thing that jumps out at me as being the thing that shapes it up, or shaped how it ended up. And if anything, the fact that BC United folded a few days later after all of this, if anything, that was much more determinative of how the election went, because it was sure looking like it was going to be a bit of a split on the right, and the NDP would have ended up with a much bigger majority than they ended up getting.
So there you have it. We'll come back to BC United in a minute, but let's talk about the BC Conservative leadership race briefly. I imagine you didn't watch the Juno News debate, which I don't think even had all the candidates in it.
No, two of them skipped it, and I was not watching it when that aired. I don't know if anything all that interesting came out of it.
Yeah, I probably won't go back and look at that.
I didn't see anything on social media bubbling up, which, it's not always the best way to get your news, but, if something big had happened there, it would have made a splash, I would have imagined.
Yeah, the NDP called it out for Juno News being a not great publication that has previously featured a lot of white nationalist content. But, parties are going to do what parties are going to do. One thing they're supposed to do as candidates, though, is pay your fees on time, and found out that Peter Millibar's campaign didn't manage to do that.
Yeah, so in this case, the check is in the mail was not satisfactory and netted his campaign a $7,500 fine from the BC Conservative Party Leadership Committee.
His check literally was in the mail, Scott. It was due April 1st, and they got it on April 2nd. And the campaign volunteer apparently was taking pictures on March 30th or March 31st, being like, see, or even March 29th, saying, I'm putting it in the mailbox now. But that, most of us know mail takes more than 2 days sometimes. So
also, who sends checks in the mail anymore? At this point, do an electronic funds transfer.
20,000 is a bit tricky to transfer at times. But
I mean, it can be, but we have like two entities that are going to be set up not with, personal banking accounts, but actual, business, corporate, or some other entity in that ballpark type of account. And those ones should be able to handle larger transactions than you or I could easily e-transfer.
For sure.
More to the point, this is one of the few hurdles you absolutely have to clear to move on to the next bit of the leadership contest. So why the hell are you doing it last minute with a check? Why did you not make sure everything was set up appropriately, or even if you had to, have someone drop it off at Party HQ?
Also, why is a late check a bigger fine than lying to the public? I know they're different entities with different rules and things, but the 7,500 versus 4,500 is wild.
Yeah, the maximum is also significantly bigger for the Conservative one. Their leadership rules allow a fine of up to $75,000 for contravening the rules.
It's almost like when parties set rules for themselves, they don't want to get punished properly for malfeasance. But apparently parties are eager to ensure their leadership candidates play by the rules. Incentives are misaligned here. I feel like this isn't going to be much of a story.
No, I was a little surprised when this turned out to be just a fine thing rather than, you don't pay your leadership fees by the time they're due. You just don't move on. And it's just kind of up to you to make sure that this gets done when it should be done. I will also note, they sent this check by unregistered mail.
That's incredible. 20,000 just disappears.
It's not like they took every step they could on this and Canada Post really screwed them by losing a registered letter. Like that time I could maybe see it be the case where you can argue it was out of your hands on this one and that a third party was responsible for it. Now this was just them mailing the check with not enough time to get there.
Also, Millibar is like one of the most established people in this race. It's like, I know he personally wasn't handling the finances, obviously, but like picking someone who can do it competently should be up on his list. So it does fall on him. And I'm not saying he hasn't taken responsibility. I think he does in his tweet here. It's a little vague with the we, but it's a weird story. But I feel like we'll all forget this in a week or two, especially if he doesn't win the race. But let's talk about what they're fighting over. Elections BC's annual reports were posted from all of the different parties, except the Greens, because the Greens still struggle. But we have some interesting numbers, and I like the annual reports as always because they don't just tell us how much money they're raising, but they tell us how much money they have in the bank through their balance sheets. So running through this fairly quickly, because numbers are always a little bit annoying, the fundraising is not that surprising. The NDP raised just over $10 million from 13,000 donors. The Conservatives raised $7.6 million from 10,000 donors. It's about what we expected. Go ahead.
Will say this, though. The Conservatives, as part of the whole drama around Rustad being removed, had a period of pretty poor fundraising where that was one of the main points of discussion around all of that issue. So the fact that they basically had a pretty terrible quarter around this and still came up not all that far behind the NDP, with a 3 million gap out of about 10 million. It's the case where I would imagine with a new leader and a little bit more discipline than happened under Rustad, particularly during the final days when all that was getting messed up. I would imagine this year they're probably going to end up being a lot closer than they have been in the past.
Well, on that side, and on the other side with the NDP kind of still struggling and floating around and not really inspiring anyone to throw money at them, unless, I don't know, the daylight savings time was a really good fundraising day for them. But what have you done for me lately? Comes to mind real quick. Nevertheless, the real difference between these two parties is in their balance sheets, where the NDP are sitting on almost $10 million in accumulated surpluses, so they could just not raise money and have a fully funded election campaign. And on the other side, the Conservatives are $1.6 million in debt.
Yeah, definitely a worse spot to be on that. I imagine this is mostly lingering election debt.
Yeah, and still high expenses that they haven't managed to overcome on that side.
Yeah, it's actually wild how much they're spending.
Because
Go
ahead.
I guess the NDP spends like a little more, but they've also have a bigger operation that's been around for a while. So the NDP spend about $5 million a year, whereas the Conservatives are spending 4.3.
Yeah, the Conservatives will definitely have to try to close that debt. It's a situation I think the NDP's been in the past, but they clearly have the most established fundraising machine right now. There's a few other interesting ones out there. 1BC has an MLA. They used to have two. They managed to post $178,000 in revenue or in income from about 2,000 donors, which is not negligible compared to the major parties. And they're sitting on about $140,000 in the bank, which makes them, depending on where the Greens are, either the third or fourth most funded party. BC United still exists. They have $150,000 in donations last year from 331 people. About half of them are giving the max, which is wild.
To keep
the dream alive.
Is it even a dream anymore? I mean, hey, was it ever a dream? I mean, back when they were the Liberals, yeah, but BC United, that contested no general elections and basically got his ass handed to it in a couple one or two by-elections, I think. During that, nobody was like a firm BC Uniteder. They kind of liked the idea of where the party was in theory, but like it never had any real oomph to it, and if anything was on a pretty stark downward trajectory ever since they did the rebrand on that. I've honestly got to wonder how many of these people just forgot to turn off their auto donations.
There's a surprising number who gave one-time donations of $1,200 to $1,500, Scott. Like, I get the $10 a month or whatever or $100 a month. Just you're waiting for your credit card to expire rather than try to call them because they probably don't answer the phones. As we missed the best part of the BC United dirty trick story, is the media tried to call Kevin Falcon at his luxury car dealership but couldn't reach him.
No, it's not a luxury car dealership. That would be more impressive than what he's got going on. It's a luxury car storage business. It's a glorified parking lot.
And he won't answer the phone, so how do you cancel your credit card? But, like, there's people like Ida Chong on the list, past MLA for the BC Liberals. One name I didn't see on the list, though, was Kevin Falcon, so I don't think he's actually giving money to the party that he is still technically leader of. BC United also got $800,000 in income from the sale of software, which presumably is their WinBC or whatever database that they've licensed out to the BC Conservatives. So that was a good chunk of change for them, and they're still sitting on about $57,000 in the bank, which is altogether more than Centre BC has. Centre BC, not a thing. They raised $45,000 in donations from 255 people and have $20,000 in cash. It's not nothing, but it's not enough to do a political party with.
No, it's barely enough to cover the expenses of keeping one alive outside of like the barest minimum filing obligations on that.
I mean, there's parties of one people on this list. Yeah,
that's what I mean. It's like you can have the, one crank that is keeping a tiny party that will never elect anyone and will at most run one candidate in the next election. You can keep those going with pretty much nothing. But anything that is going to try and be anything more than that, you're going to burn through 45,000 in a year, not if you try and do anything substantive.
Are you saying the party of citizens who have decided to think for ourselves and be our own politicians is not ever going to become a majority government?
No. I would be shocked if they ever got within spitting distance of being a majority in a single polling station in a single riding.
So that's where the larger of the parties stands. We will wait on bated breath for the BC Greens to one day meet a elections BC deadline. I think
How
they did
are they so
once.
bad at this?
No, I don't know, Scott.
Once or twice I could understand. This many times, though?
Just live on different time in the Green Party. We don't follow your strict calendar rules.
They're really not beating the aging Salt Spring hippies living on island time allegations, are they?
No. Let's jump to housing. A couple new stories have come out from the province. We've talked about this private members bill M216, the Professional Reliance Act that came from NDP MLA George Anderson, that has moved to committee, but he has announced together with Christine Boyle, Minister of Housing and Municipal Affairs, that the bill is not going anywhere because the government will do something with it eventually, probably.
Maybe. I'll believe it when I see it. Everything is so vague here, and it's not like they've promised to enact a new or bring in a new version of this legislation, just that they are going to explore how to build on the principles of it.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Whatever it means to undertake further work on the bill store principles is just so vague that it honestly reads like they're just shelving the thing, and maybe someone in Boyle's ministry will write some like internal position papers on it, and it'll get shuffled back and forth among the civil servants there and ultimately go nowhere. If one's being cynical about it.
Yeah, it's a weird story, right? Because Anderson did something really interesting here. Because as far as I can tell, this was him looking at the situation and saying, hey, architects and engineers are regulated professionals, so why does all their work have to be second guessed by municipalities? Why don't we remove some of this red tape?
I will, yeah, also to add on that and provide a little context, as part of the regulation, at least for engineers, I don't know about architects, but I would presume a similar principle applies there. There is a requirement that the work already be checked and that the firms that are also regulated have internal QA QC processes to ensure that the work is of quality.
Yeah. Municipalities obviously didn't like the bill because, or at least some, who spoke out and wanted to continue to exercise extra oversight and control. But like on the broader principle, I think we both like the idea of MLAs who are passionate about an issue bringing forward substantive private members' bills for debate. That's what the legislature is supposed to be for.
Yeah, and this was thinking across all the private members' bills I can remember. This is probably one of the most substantive that would have had the greatest impact if it had actually gotten into law. A few have made it, but outside of the, declare this day on the calendar, the day of whatever, and then, which were, the ones that mostly made it through back before they changed the rules for private members' bills to allow a little more flexibility and movement and actual chance they could pass. Like the few that passed, there was some decent things in there.
I think the most substantive was Andrew Weaver's Business Corporations Act, which was really like the Green Party's bill in 2019. And that one allowed like B corporations to be registered.
Yeah, I'd actually be curious to hear how many actually did end up getting registered from that.
Yeah.
But like this one could have had a fairly significant impact in terms of how stuff gets built in the province and could have potentially sped up a lot of the approval stuff, which is something that's pretty consistently cited as one of the things that needs to be improved if you're going to get housing built.
And instead of getting the proper committee debate on this, the government's like forced Anderson to withdraw it, essentially. And I don't know what he got in exchange.
But yeah, it's disappointing that this one isn't going forward. But it would be nice to kind of see something significant that would have also been positive for it to go forward, and yeah, to get some pushback from a bunch of municipalities. But yeah, the Senate of me thinks this because municipalities like having various methods to slow down or deny projects that they don't like, and this would have taken one of the arrows out of their quiver on that.
Or hell, even if it just got to go to a free vote at the BC legislature, so we had to see the NDP actually come down on this.
Yeah. Like, one of the things it did, too, was it removed the liability that municipalities would have had for approving this stuff. It would have shifted all of the liability onto the architect or engineer that stamped the plans for something on this. So it's not even like the municipalities would have being legally exposed to stuff that they ended up permitting because they relied on a professional's work on this too, which also makes me a little suspicious of just how in good faith the municipalities' objections were on this.
Well, one municipality that has not arguably had good faith objections is West Vancouver to the housing targets set by the province. According to the province, West Vancouver has delivered 58 of the 220 units it was told to build by the province, and following a series of do-betters from the province, they have finally told District Corporation to implement the Ambleside Centre plan and get into compliance. Which comes back to what legislation that was passed 3 years ago now? 4?
Yeah, something like that. It was it Housing Supply Act and a couple others?
Yeah.
There's one other one that came with it at the same time. And yeah, those were like 2023, I think.
They were early David Eby things before the election, for sure.
Yeah, and yeah, good on them for doing this. This is also after they've done like several back and forths on all of this, and kind of just left scratch my head about the strategy they took on this thing overall, because yeah, they gave themselves the power to order local governments to do this sort of thing, 3 years ago now, or yes, in fairness to them, like 2.5, but on that. But still, that means they spent years, batting things back and forth between, like every time they did it, they got, a little pushback from the cities. It became, a thing where people could point to on, oh, look at how the government is overstepping on this, or trying to force, local municipalities to do something they don't want. The fact that it was set up so that they were, municipalities were given general directives in terms of housing they wanted to see built, and then it was left up to the municipalities, and then someone would come in after quite a while to grade their work on it, and then, give them some sternly worded letters about how their work wasn't quite up to snuff on it, and then finally we're coming around to this. It just wasted a lot of time and political capital, and I think they probably should have looked at something that would have been a little bit bigger up front, but would have spared all of this wasted time, discussion, back and forth, and disagreements between the municipalities and the province on that, by doing something like adopting a more Japanese model where the central government lays out, these are the various kinds of zones you can have. Y'all get to pick what works in your community, but we're going to set the minimum level here, and you have flexibility on which ones go where, but we're not going to do this case of every municipality has their own bespoke bylaws on all of this stuff. Well, it would have gotten us to the point they're trying to get us to now, significantly earlier and with much less shenanigans.
I don't disagree fundamentally. I think politically the question is, if they'd have done that, would the municipalities have ginned up even more outrage to the point that the NDP would have lost the 2024 election and a Conservative or United government repeals all of it and sets us 3 steps further back in housing reform, and it never gets touched for a generation? I don't know.
I don't know about that.
But that was a close election.
Yeah, I mean, it was a close election, but if they'd actually been able to show more progress on it, it might have actually helped their chances too.
The fun thing is, after all of these years of delay on West Van, we now have, in theory, an approved plan that will still take time for anyone to build anything in, especially given no one wants to build anything anymore because it got real expensive and complicated for many other reasons. But
yeah, housing costs going up, interest rates going up, while the prices of the sale price of housing has dropped. Is not necessarily a great thing for encouraging the construction of house. I mean, price drop's good and it's gonna help, but also it is the case where it didn't drop enough to make things affordable, particularly in West Van, and you're kind of left in this awkward spot. And a big part of the problem here is that municipalities have structured their fee system, their approval system, all that, kind of on the assumption that the market was always going to go up and that there was always going to be demand for this stuff, and you could always squeeze a little more juice from the developers on this because, hey, it's a rising market. Everyone's going to be making money in the end. And when that no longer was the case, you ended up with situations where cities were charging hundreds of thousands of dollars for permission to build new housing. Well, at the same time, the underlying economics were changing that made stuff no longer pencil, and it's a big problem. And we should have never have gotten to the point where city budgets were dependent upon this stuff, nor should we have set it up on the assumption that housing prices could only go up, because that's an insane way to structure things, and yet that has basically been the implicit way that or the implicit assumption that's been built into every city in BC's approach to housing.
One city that does seem to be doing slightly better is Kelowna, where they say the rental vacancy rate is over 3% for the second straight year. And a quick Google of what does rent cost in Kelowna suggests it's been dropping year over year, except maybe in the 4-bed range. But you can now rent a 1-bedroom for under $2,000 a month in Kelowna. That's leaving the city saying, hey, one challenge we do have is we're a tourist destination and we don't have enough hotel rooms. Can we finally start renting some of these empty apartments out as short-term rentals once again? And David Eby was asked about this and said, possibly. Specifically says, we recognize the legislation is not helpful for the summer tourist season, so we look forward to having more to say about this soon. We are working closely with the city to try and find a way to provide additional tourist accommodations during those important summer months. For its part, the city already has a bylaw in place that is accepting business license in pre-review for short-term rentals, as they're just eagerly wanting to get those Airbnbs back open.
Yeah, this is one of those things where I'm generally fine with cities deciding how they want to do it themselves. That said, 3% is kind of considered, as a rule of thumb, the point at which a market starts to get balanced. It's not a landlord's market in that case where rents are going to be climbing, but it's hardly one where rents fall and it becomes significantly easier to be a tenant out looking for rental accommodations. Just kind of in the weird middle zone on that. But let cities figure out which balance they want between Airbnbs and homes. It ultimately strikes me as fine on this. It's not like it doesn't run into the same problems that I think some of the zoning stuff does on local control.
I mean, you can see it either way. I think cities were just eager to see, because cities don't really care if there's a renter, right? Cities collect money from the property owner through property tax. So it doesn't matter necessarily to a city other than voters get mad when things get too expensive, but renters don't vote as much, as we well know. And so, I can see the argument for regulating it, especially at a provincial level. At some point, it does become is it an issue? And like you say, Kelowna's probably in that weird middle zone. I think the substantive solution everywhere is to build more hotels as well, which no one's doing.
No,
or there's minimal amounts being done.
Yeah, and I'd be curious to see how good Kelowna has been on that, because I don't know the specifics there, but at least in the Vancouver experience, which is a significant tourist destination, as well as the province's biggest business center, and a place where it just makes sense on a multitude of fronts to build hotels. The city's actually been losing hotel rooms for years on that. It's very hard to actually just get one permitted on that. There's some bigger issues around, do hotels make financial sense to build versus residential, which is a problem in terms of land values, and that also just needs to be solved by getting more abundant housing. But ultimately, cities, including ones that are fairly tourist focused, have not made actually building hotels a priority, and a little bit of this has been helped along, or has offloaded the costs onto Airbnb for a bit. But you also had the case where during the pandemic, the province bought up a bunch of hotels to convert into shelter spaces, but that traded a short-term gain for a long-term problem in the hospitality industry. Well,
the hospitality industry was also wildly struggling.
Oh yeah, it was struggling there, but I'm saying nobody thought ahead to what would happen in 2023, 2024, when all of these hotels have been taken off of the market and are no longer providing accommodations for visitors to the city. No one's what do we do then? Is that going to cause some problems when this pandemic is over? And
I'll say this. I have stayed and booked hotels in Kelowna and Vancouver and Victoria in the last year, and downtown Vancouver, rooms are a minimum of $350 a night, even just in a random weekend in April, let's say.
They were significantly worse this
That's
past
the only
summer.
one I could find the cheapest.
Yeah.
The Kelowna and Victoria are still relatively affordable. My standards have also just like jumped a lot from like a decade ago when I was like, no, I could find something for $100 a night. Now it's like, oh, it's under 200. It's a great deal.
Yeah, I last time I visited Vancouver, I could not find one. Granted, it was like middle of summer, so it was peak season.
Yeah.
But like, I could not find one even close to being in the 200 range. It's bad.
No. Yeah. So I'll be curious what the premier does around here and how the response is on that. But maybe legislation around short-term rentals is coming. Federally, the most interesting news of the week was, of course, the shocking announcement that another conservative MP has crossed the floor to the Liberals. And
That's not shocking.
No.
The who it was,
Yeah.
that was a big shot.
Marilyn Gladu, the MP for Sarnia since, was it 2015 at least, who does quite well there and got over 50% in the last election, which she's grown since, is now a Liberal.
Never in a million years would I have guessed that she would have been one of the ones that crossed the floor. She is on the right side of the Conservative Party. Yeah. There are definitely MPs you could see, if they announced they were crossing the floor, you'd be like, okay, yeah, they're like the PC wing of the party. They're not all that, there isn't as much space between them and, a carny Liberal on some of that stuff. Like, yeah, you could at least see it. But Marilyn Gladu, though? Like,
yeah,
that's a shock.
Yeah, everyone up till now has been understandable, with maybe Lori Edlett being the most surprising. But yeah, Gladu's history includes vociferously opposing the conversion therapy ban, talking about COVID vaccines as, well, I don't know if she specifically called any, peddled COVID vaccine conspiracies, but she was staunchly against the mandates and requirements and wanted inquiries into that. She would push for a few years a private members bill to declare December a Christian Heritage Month, which is not a typical Liberal thing, but you'll find some support there. She called for the military to be called in on pipeline protests, but I think she also supported the convoy blockades at times. So just an interesting all-around human being to be a Liberal, which Mark Carney says, if you join our party, you have said you support Liberal values. To which people go, what are those in your mind, Mr. Carney? He's still popular, though.
Yeah. I mean, that is a good question. But and on the popularity front, I don't know, I have some trouble seeing that continue indefinitely with stuff like that. So one of Carney's big assets is he is seen as the not a politician, the competent businessman who's, led central banks and is a get things done kind of guy, not an ideological politician or like a hyper partisan or or someone who plays dirty politics or any of that stuff, right? Like, it's not his brand and positioning, and that has generally served him well, particularly when you have Pierre Poilievre as your opposite on that front, and the same thing will play off against Avi Lewis. But the more you do kind of like blatant politicking with stuff like this, the more that value proposition is going to be undermined on it. And this is one of those ones where it's going to be hard to see it as anything other than like a crass political move on his part.
Yeah, and like, there's rumors spreading that there's possibly 9 more opposition MPs considering crossing the floor, which is exactly the kind of thing the Liberals are going to just keep saying because it makes them sound good.
Well,
but if that's true, why do you want her?
Than the makes the Liberals sound good, will cause confusion and dissent in the Conservative ranks.
Yeah, like we have this Toronto Star story that says up to 40 Conservative MPs are afraid Pierre Poilievre is going to cost them their seats. They're not willing to trigger the Reform Act provisions to oust him, but they're looking at their chances and going, they're not good. This is also coming after Communication Director Katie Merrifield and, BC political mover and shaker. I don't want to call her a hack, but, one of those inside people. She resigned from his team, and it's unclear what motivated that resignation as well, but it's an inopportune time for that move.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I'm starting to wonder if Pierre Poilievre can survive this. The first couple, he managed to hold on to it, but it's one thing when it's, those couple ones Michael Maw, he was a first-term MP, hardly seemed like a hardliner. When you're losing someone like Gladue, though, I would have more easily seen Gladue at one point defect to the People's Party than the Liberals.
Yeah,
like when that he can't hold the caucus together in this way, that sure seems to be a tough one to make the argument that you've got a handle on things, so that this is just a temporary bump in the road.
It's very funny because people dug up Marilyn Gladue's past statement that floor crossers should be banned and you should have to run in a by-election if you do that, which is now Pierre Poilievre's position as well.
Yeah. Incidentally, this was not long ago tweet from 2015 or something. This was from January when one of the other floor crossers crossed.
Maybe they'll make that Alto train go to Sarnia, and that's what she got.
Yeah, I'm a little curious what the quid pro quo on this one was, or the promises made, because, like I said, this just seems like such a poor, inconceivable fit that I'm having a little trouble understanding why she would do this if there wasn't like a big gain to be had.
She joins a functional team. It's probably all it is. Maybe.
I don't know. Like,
seems weird.
Given some of her, where she's come down on the past and various political issues, I don't necessarily see that as the big motivating factor for her. She doesn't strike me as one of these people that is highly frustrated with how partisan politics is and wishes everyone could just buckle down and get stuff done like a bunch of technocrats.
Scott, maybe she finally got her COVID vaccine and she came to the light. I mentioned the Alto Rail. That's in the news this week as Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne was under fire. As it turned out, his business partner is working with the company. And it's now a question of, is he in a conflict? Champagne recused himself from any decision around the train line. And now the ethics commissioner has come out with a letter that got released to the press that says there's no risk of a potential conflict here. Champagne is not standing to benefit from anything involved. And also he's finance minister, not transportation minister. He's not running this project.
Was it his business partner or his wife?
He has a personal relationship with a senior manager at the Crown Corporation responsible for building it. Oh, so it is his partner. I think it is his wife. This is why partner's not always the best term to use for these situations, because it's ambiguous. Sitting there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you want a gender neutral term, yeah, spouse would work fine. Person. Yep. Looking on his Wikipedia. Anne-Marie Gaudette is, as Wikipedia calls it, domestic life partner, which also is the name in the CTV story.
But yeah, like fundamentally, the point from the ethics commissioner here is, while she might work for Alto, it responds to the Minister of Transport, and he has no decision-making or human resource authority over them. So he can't, help her out directly, other than, I guess he could talk to the other minister, but that would be true of any spouse. Well, the finance minister has a little bit more broad authority.
Yeah, so this is the thing, is that I am sure the ethics commissioner has, appropriately applied the text of the law on this one. I don't have any reason to doubt that. That said, finance minister is one of the most powerful portfolios, and it touches on every other government department and agency in a way. And even if the strict text of the act is met, I would say that a politician in this position, well, not just politician, a minister in this position has a duty to not just meet the bare minimum here and avoid not just the legal test for conflict of interest, but perception of it. Because, this project is a massive expenditure that the government is making. It's projected to cost $90 billion, if it comes in on budget, which incidentally, we should have another discussion at some point about the insane cost of this relative to what other countries spend per kilometer on high-speed rail. But that's a long-standing problem with North American projects in general on this. But specifically, circling back to the point, is that this is a huge financial output from the government on it. And, it's not like his partner is, some junior engineer working on designing the signaling system for, one stretch of track or something. She's a vice president, someone at the executive level here. And there is still a case where, even if it's not a direct report or a report with one or two people in between, there is still the case where, his family's financial situation, as well as kind of just what's going to happen with the government outlays on this, are connected. And it would probably be good to still have that screen in place and that recusal, even if the ethics commissioner does in fact clear him.
Scott, it wouldn't be a Canadian rail project without a little grease. It's the oldest thing this country was built on, and how dare you speak against our national pastime of using railway projects to launder money.
For the lawyers out there, we are not accusing anyone of committing money laundering violations.
And that has been Politicoast. Find links to everything we talked about at politicoast.ca. Support the show and get access to our exclusive Slack channel at patreon.com/politicoast. Our intro music is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikov. Politicoast is a production of Leg and Boot Media. Audio editing provided by Jesse Woodward at listener-supported CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Learn more at chly.ca.